Frau Bundeskanzlerin.
Federal Chancellor, dear Angela, Federal Chancellor, retired Wolfgang Schüssel, Norbert Lammert, dear Hans-Georg Pöttering, Dr. Hassemer, Mr. Schwarz, Dr. Adenauer, ladies and gentlemen, members of parliament, dear guests. 30 years ago, the news that the border is open forthwith spread like a wildfire throughout Berlin. Thousands of people gathered at the border crossing points and surprised border guards. They gave way to the pressure of masses and opened the barriers. The rest is history. It's the pictures of joy and hope we remember when we commemorate November the 9th, 1989. However, with the fall of the wall, a European movement of liberation found its peak. Under the shield of the Western powers, the West of Europe, over decades, did not only heal the deep wounds of two world wars, but the free world held out its hand to West Germany and readmitted it to the circle of free nations. And despite all turbulences caused by the political everyday business, Germany will always remain thankful, especially to the United States, the United Kingdom, and France forever. In my thanks for decades of peace, freedom and security, I would explicitly include NATO, the most powerful defense alliance of the world, a unique organization made up by 29 member states today, and the youngest state know exactly what NATO means, our friends in the Baltic region and in the Balkans. And especially we, the Germans, know how it feels to live alive at the border. Throughout its history of 70 years, a lot has changed within NATO, but one thing remained the same. NATO has always been what its member states make of it. It depends on 29 states to contribute and to change something in words and deeds. I think NATO, despite of all hiccups of recent weeks, has proved itself as a protective shield of freedom. The long lines count. And again, the history of Europe cannot be told without NATO. The fact that the Iron Curtain fell has a lot to do with the steadfastness of Western democracies, but also with the invincible longing for freedom of the people in the East. As early as in June 1989, the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Gyula Horn, in cooperation with his Austrian colleague, cut a hole into the barbed wire fence that divided Europe between East and West. And in Poland, the Solidarity movement won a triumphal victory in the first free elections. Today, 30 years on, not only we, the Germans, live in a reunited and a peaceful Europe. Today, the former countries of the Warsaw Pact constitute an important part of our European Union. Foes have become friends. The fact that it turned out this way could not be taken for granted when looking back. The fact that Helmut Kohl managed to seize the historic opportunity for reunification is also owing to previously acting men, Adenauer, Kiesinger, Brandt and Schmidt. After the horrors of the war, it became the supreme duty to re-establish trust for Germany. It is our happiness that they all did more than to heal and reconcile. They invested their strength and energy in our united Europe. A reunified Germany at that time would not have been conceivable without the European framework for many neighbours. It's to do with the strength of the shared idea that supported us then. This is what we should never forget with regard to the future. The survivor of Auschwitz, Simone Weil, in commemoration of the victims of Holocaust, said in the German Bundestag some years ago, "Can one comprehend what a moral victory it was when the new member states of the former Eastern Bloc were admitted how this admission takes place in a peaceful manner." After the war, the French woman became the first president of the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow we commemorate November the 9th. There's hardly any other day that illustrates so clearly the contradictions of German and European history. On November the 9th, 1918, the SPD politician Philipp Scheidemann proclaimed the first German Republic in Berlin. The initiator of this so-called November Revolution were, among others, the sailors of Kiel. They revolted against a ridiculous order of the naval command to set out to a last ridiculous battle. November the 9th, 1938, became known as the Crystal Night, which is the darkest part of our history. Marauding SA thugs and Nazi gangs destroyed synagogues and the Jewish shops and flats. Jewish citizens became fair game until the catastrophe of the Shoah. It wasn't a long way to go. On probably no other day of German history, good and evil, hope and disgrace, courage and cowardice, grandeur and the abyss of mankind are so close to each other as on November the 9th. November the 9th is symbolic for the self-doubt that come over us, the Germans, again and again because of these contradictions, but also for the suspicion and the skepticism others look at us. But this also demonstrates what a blessing and what a benefit the united Europe means for us, the Germans, as a guarantor for peace, human rights, the rule of law, as a guardian of tolerance, justice, solidarity, and the equality between men and women. A common work we can be unreservedly proud. Our parents and grandparents have rebuilt Germany from the ruins of the war. Germany's and Europe's salvation is identical, Konrad Adenauer said back in 1946. Therefore, I think it is wrong when many people say the remembrance of the darkest chapters of our past will not help why European member states should work together more closely. But it is also correct that the reference to the peaceful work of Europe is not sufficient alone to describe the advantages of the European Union. The generation of my children cannot conceive a life without Europe anymore. Europe is home to my children, but also Germany as well as it is Lower Saxony. With an ease they have internalized that the beauty of Europe exists because of its diversity. Europe, in their lives, fortunately enough, has become a matter of course. This means not, however, that this original trust in Europe must not be rebuilt every day again. And Europe certainly is confronted with great challenges. You know them all. The guarantor for peace, the human rights, Brexit, and the strengthening of populists, the trade conflict between the USA and China as a burden on the European economy, the fragility of our neighborhood. My predecessor, Jean-Claude Juncker, said in the State of Europe speech that only 5% of Europeans in a few decades will come from Europe. I am, however, deeply convinced that these supposed weaknesses of Europe may be turned into strength. The strength of the idea of Europe has not been diminished. There is no challenge for Europe that cannot be mastered with the strength of Europe. A good example is the trade policy. Yes, this is true. In a world where the relative power of Europe is declining, while many EU members alone would be too weak in order to negotiate with the USA about customs or a free trade agreement with Japan. Together, however, we are 500 million and we account for 40% of the global GDP. Together, we represent the biggest trading power in the world. Together, we can negotiate a trade agreement which does not only benefit our economies, but with which we can also implement our values. Another example is digitization. The net opens excellent new spaces of knowledge and creates social inclusion and innovation. But it also comes with a price. When you Google for your name, within less than a second, you will be given information about what you have done so far. Sometimes correct, sometimes fake. The net knows more about yourself than your closest friends. Moreover, the big tech companies are not interested so much what you did yesterday, but what you will do tomorrow, what you eat, buy, and especially why you do that. Any click trains algorithms and makes your behavior more calculable. These data are as valuable as gold. They are traded, but not with the user, but among other firms in an unregulated space. Europe has started to act. The name is dry. The impact is big. The General Data Protection Regulation. Now, professionals refer to this pioneering deed as a present to the world. Why so? No other global force than Europe would have been able to achieve this. In the USA, the market, as a tradition, comes first. And the government, as a matter of principle, is reluctant. In Asia, it is exactly the other way around. The governments tend to dominate, and the group is considered to be more important than the individual. The result, however, is the same. The individual stands behind the market and behind the state. Europe is different. We have a long tradition. The influence of the government and the market is always balanced and harmonized, and the individual is considered to be of top priority. This cultural achievement is a big advantage in the times of digitalization. Europe needs more of this. The world needs more Europe. We are still in an early stage of digitalization. Of course, progress in this direction is not a given. It takes hard work, and the European companies have introduced the data protection rules, so new ecosystems have developed, setting a yardstick for others who cooperate with them. Indeed, it is about standardization and sovereignty. It's about the protection of sovereignty of the individual and its full control over personal data. It's about competition and standardization. In this field, Europe, from within its own strength, has become active, and this describes the special and beautiful thing of it. Europe, in this way, has gained power and has returned part of the state's sovereignty for the citizens, which they have got lost, to the data giants. This is the key we need, the shared strength which we can develop together as Europeans. Even the Brexit is a good example, showing how Europe has gained fresh strength. Yes, I really mean Brexit. We are very sorry about our British friends to leave us. Many who doubt the EU have now seen the value of the EU. The Brexit was, as it was supposed at the beginning, not the start of a process of disintegration. On the contrary, as diverse as we are, during the Brexit negotiations, 27 EU countries are united, without any malice, without cynicism, on a joint firm position. We defend our principles, the four freedoms of the market, and our ideas of values. As paradoxical it might sound, the shock of the Brexit has strengthened us, because it does not only show what it means to leave the EU, but also how much every state can win as a member of the Union. So this is the strength that supports us again.
Ladies and gentlemen, when the people in 1989 toppled the regime in the East, they did this because they hoped for a better future for themselves and their country. Like us, looking back to 1989, now the next generation will measure us against the courage we show today to shape the future. The order given to us by the young people in the streets is very clear. It is our responsibility to fight climate change and to hand over to them a planet that is worth living for. We need to take courageous decisions to invest in research and pursue an economic and industrial policy that is geared to the future. And we have to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. Of course, I'm aware that Europe accounts only for 9 to 10% of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. But Europe can take the lead, for instance, in low-carbon technologies. It can show that climate investments can be sustainable. Europe can show that structural change leads to new skills and jobs. It can prove that both sides can be winners, the society and businesses. This is the reason why I will table the first European climate protection law that transposes this political aim into binding law. We need massive investments. I will propose an investment plan for a sustainable Europe, and I will transform part of the European Investment Bank into a climate protection bank. This will enable us to mobilize 1,000 billion euros in one decade and to root climate protection in all political fields. We only have this one planet and we have overexploited it. We cannot delay actions. We need to act now. And when we do it right, if we do it right, it's not only good for our planet. If we do it right, others will follow suit. China is currently introducing the ETS, and they take us as a role model. They ask us in the Commission what we have done correct. If we do it correctly, Europe will be the trailblazer for climate-friendly funding models. Then Europe can be a role model for a social transition into a way of living and working in a resource-sparing manner. So we can become a trendsetter if we rely on our strength. After the end of the Cold War, many thought that the progress of the liberal democracy cannot be stopped. You all are aware of the term end of history. Today we have to admit that our complacency had been naive. Here I think of Russia. The Kremlin shifts established borders in Europe by force and tries to fill the vacuum left by the US. I think of China, where the hopes of a convergence to the Western model failed to materialize. 30 years ago, a few months before the wall came down in Berlin, there were tanks rolling over the Tiananmen Square. The Association of German Industry, looking at China, speaks about an open competition of systems. China is large and it acts with resolve. Nevertheless, there is no reason to be disheartened. As long as we Europeans stand together and make use of our skills, Europe is today more attractive than we are often aware of. Well, we may grow older in Europe, like Russia, people in Russia and China, but we have something that is invaluable: a rule of law, freedom, democracy, openness for many ways of life. Something young people do not find in China or Russia. Europe's open societies link entrepreneurial spirit and drive for freedom. Here, researchers do not only find funds for their projects, but also good schools for their kids without having to pay very high school fees. Nurses can not only make money in Europe, but they can also do their A-levels. Young people do not need wealthy parents in Europe to study abroad, and Erasmus grant does the trick. In Europe, the high-speed train takes you from Brussels to Paris in a bit more than 1 hour. Our health systems figure among the best in the world. Our trailblazing role in climate protection was already mentioned. I'm deeply convinced that this Europe will remain attractive in the digital area, also compared to the US and China. We just need to rely on the power of our common idea and follow our own European path in a very self-confident way. American political scientists coined the term soft power to describe this. This describes the idea that cultural attraction may also generate political influence. But this is only half of the truth, because soft power alone is not sufficient today. If we want to compete in the world, Europe also must learn the language of power. This means to build up own muscles where we relied for a long time on others, for instance in security policies, and we also need to use our force in a more targeted way for European interests. I mentioned China. Yes, it's an important trading partner of Europe, but in turn the European Union is the biggest trading partner of China. We can influence the conditions of the deals we strike. We are happy about each foreign business participating in EU tenders, be it to build autobahns or electricity routes, but in future we will pay more attention to that these businesses comply with our standards with regard to working conditions and environmental protection. We are open to investment. They are proof of the competitiveness of our tech companies. Nevertheless, we have to restrict the unbridled shopping spree by foreign businesses that often get state subsidies. We approve of big tech companies doing business in the EU, but they can only do it because of the good infrastructure and the highly skilled people. So we also expect from these high-tech companies to pay adequate taxes, since they use all of this. As regards the external interests of Europe, we need to be more strategic, also with regard to the enlargement policy. It is in our interest to give the Western Balkans a European perspective. We share the same history, the same continent, the same culture and the same challenges. We made very, very high demands on North Macedonia and Albania, and they have delivered. Now we also have to keep our promise and to make accession talks possible. If we Europeans fail to provide the Western Balkans with a perspective by our side, others will fill the gap, be it China, Russia, Turkey or Saudi Arabia. And we must not forget, the heads of government had promised such a perspective as early as in 2003 at the Western Balkan Summit. And the idea behind it was to anchor the European peace idea in a region that had been shaken by gruesome conflicts only 20 years ago. And the history of the EU has shown since 1989 that it pays off if the EU opens up. When we talk about the Western Balkans, we also recall the exceptional situation in autumn 2015 when thousands of migrants arrived day by day at the German-Austrian border. Nowadays, we only speak about a small fraction of this number. The fundamental question has, however, not yet been answered. How to deal with, in future, with migration in our direct neighborhood. I had many talks with European heads of state. They are all aware that Europe cannot do business as usual. Also, those who block at the moment know that the phenomenon of migration will not simply go away. The good news is they want to return to the table and discuss sustainable solutions. And they are also aware that each member state has to make a contribution in a spirit of solidarity. I think there is a window for a new start in the field of migration. There will, however, be some guiding principles. Europe will remain an open continent. The European way of life is not marked by barbed wire, but by cross-border research, travel and trade, as well as asylum rights. But we must not promise more than we can deliver. I don't have a simple solution, but what I can promise you is that my Commission will persistently deal with this issue that is so important for the cohesion of the community, and in the first half of 2020 we will table a proposal. Here again I rely on the fact that the European idea will win the upper hand. Together we will master challenges that would overtax us individually. Ladies and gentlemen, when more than 60 years ago I was born in Brussels, the EU, under a different name at the time, had 6 member states. Today, one lifespan later, it is 28 member states. Nobody was forced to join this European Union. They all made a free decision, and they had to make big efforts to achieve this. 30 years after the fall of the wall, Europe has become for many people an opportunity come true. 30 years after the peaceful revolution, we can be proud of the courage that has brought back together the East and the West of Europe. For 30 years, young people have known nothing else but a Europe marked by freedom. For them, it is part of their identity to study, work, live, and love across borders. This is the true wealth of Europe. We can enjoy this wealth because others before us worked for peace and freedom. 30 years ago, people were courageous enough to fight the lack of freedom. We now need courage again for Europe, for a Europe of freedom. Courage for a Europe that stands up for its values. Courage for a Europe that takes its futures into their own hands. When I was a young mum, I accompanied my husband to the Stanford University, and I was impressed by the coat of arms of the university with the words of Gottlieb Fichte. It says, "The air of freedom lives on." Today, at this memorable day for us Germans, we can state with some pride, nowhere else in the world this sentence applies more than in the European Union.